Well, good evening, everyone. It's good to see you all again. There's a lot going on for Fèis this weekend, but it's great to have you all back in for another one of our Friday night softer side sessions. I hope you've all got a glass of something tasty in front of you, and please feel free to let us know what you're having and what you think of it. I tuned into our whiskey tasting last night, their festival, the final installment of their festival, and it was the Game of Thrones series, and that was a really cool evening to taste along. So, as I say, let us know what you're drinking in the chat, and every week, try and get any questions that you've got in, and we'll make our best effort to answer them. As always, there's a lot going on online at the moment. So if you're watching this on YouTube and anything goes wrong technically, you can head over to our Facebook page. And if you're watching this on Facebook and anything goes wrong there, you can head over to our YouTube page and you'll be able to see us and carry on with the conversation. Tonight's conversation is going to be all about a subject that I'm quite passionate about. It's effectively my job, and that is whiskey education. In the last probably 10 to 15 years, with the boom in whiskey and the boom in spirits and craft drinks, there's been more and more ways to learn about them, from things like the Heriot Watts degrees in distillation and the IBD diplomas, all the way through to speaking to your retailer in a store and having a dram. And then in the middle, you've got distillery tours and things like that. So a lot of education available right now. And my guest tonight is John from the Edinburgh Whisky Academy, and we're going to be chatting generally about whiskey education, why it's important, why we feel it's important, and a little bit more about what Edinburgh Whisky Academy have to offer. So if anyone in the chat has any experience with various styles of whiskey education, let us know what your thoughts were. And we look forward to hearing from you. So I'm going to bring in my guest tonight, John Robertson. Good evening, John.
Hi, Scott. How are you doing?
Not too bad, thanks. You?
Good. Yeah, I'm very well. Thank you. Very well.
I laugh a little bit behind the scenes every week with that little clip that comes up, just because StreamYard that we're using here has made it very easy to look professional. I have no ability to do that whatsoever. I've spent my life learning about whiskey, not learning about computer programs and things. And I know you're probably in a similar boat to me right now and just trying to pick up all this tech stuff that's going on, right?
Yeah, it's been a journey and a lesson, but I think we're finally getting there with embracing this sort of new way of life, professionally, socially. Otherwise, it's the screen is our best friend at the moment. So it was a lovely video. It really set the tone.
Yeah, no, it can only go downhill from there, right?
If it's my fault, I apologize.
It's more than likely me. Last week I forgot to even stream this to Facebook, so we're already doing better this week. But it's good to have you here. Thanks for doing this, for taking the time. Most important question of all, what is in your glass tonight?
It's a very good question. As I was saying off air just before we joined, I've run out of my Tomatin that I picked up from the distillery about 10 years ago. It obviously didn't last 10 years. So tonight I'm on a Bowmore #1, which is a lovely mellow dram to start a long weekend.
Nice. I'm seeing a few folk coming in with their drams tonight. Carl's drinking our Tomatin 15 Moscatel finish, which is a fantastic whiskey. Tabitha Adams is on a Benromach 10 100 proof tonight, so starting off a little bit strong as well. So hopefully you're enjoying that. And I saw someone's on Aberlour Buna tonight, which is always a very, very good whiskey. So yeah, great to see everyone's joining in and having a nice dram with us. So John, before we get into the whole whiskey education thing, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, how you got into whiskey, why you love whiskey.
Yeah, it's a story of chapters for me, really. I think it all started for me when I went up to study in Aberdeen. So I went up there to study surveying. I spent 4 years there. And being in Aberdeen, you are not far at all from the heart of whiskey country, so Speyside, and not too far away from Tomatin either. So I'd kind of take occasional trips out from Aberdeen into the country, into Speyside, visit some of the distilleries, and kind of generally get to know a bit more about whiskey, about the industry, and about production. After I left Aberdeen, I moved down to London. I spent 10 years there working in management consultancy. So nothing to do with whiskey at all professionally, but it was something that just grew and grew and grew. I was always interested. I always had a kind of semi-collection going. I always enjoyed talking to people about it when we were drinking. But it wasn't until I started traveling internationally about 3 or 4 years ago that it really became something of a passion for me. So I did a lot of traveling with work across the world. And more often than not, when you're sitting in a bar or sitting in a meeting and someone finds out you're Scottish, the obvious question is, what do you know about whiskey? You must love whiskey. And, truthfully, I was able to say, yes, I do. I do love whiskey. And here's what I know about it. But as these went on, I'd go abroad and I'd end up spending time with clients, with colleagues in these kind of far-flung places. And it ended up kind of turning into impromptu whiskey tastings or chats that lasted for hours and hours about whiskey. And my knowledge and passion for it just grew. And it really got to the point about 2 or 3 years ago where my passion was just overtaking my vocation. And I made quite a clear decision when I came back into the UK that I wanted to make a career out of it. And it was at that point I started searching for ways to get into the industry, get some credibility, get some qualifications, get some more formal knowledge. And that's when I first became aware of the Edinburgh Whisky Academy. So before I started working with them, I took their flagship diploma, which is a diploma in single malt whiskey, which we'll go into a little bit more detail on later. And that was the platform I needed to get into the industry and start talking to people credibly with some education behind me, some formal education. And it's really gone from there. So for the last 2 years, I've been working sort of informally in the industry, but certainly since the start of this year, I've kind of joined the industry full time. And, having worked across so many different markets and sectors over the last 10 years, it's been really refreshing to see how people interact with each other, even as competitors. It's just kind of all coming together under this one incredible product that the world seems to love. So it's been an incredible journey, and I'm sort of delighted to be able to have taken that step and made it formal now.
Yeah, that's a thing that I think that's what I latched onto in the whiskey industry when I first started getting into it, was the fact that you were standing at a festival, at a show, and the person on the stand next to you, who throughout the day would be competing for Glencairn glasses to pour whiskey into, was also asking, do you fancy a beer? I'm going to the bar, and things like that. There's this camaraderie behind the scenes. And someone said to me recently, it's interesting that with whiskey, the competition level, especially the Scotch whiskey industry, I don't know how it is for the international markets, but competition in Scotch very much is as thin as the label that's on the bottle on the shelf. Behind the scenes, with the history of blending, it's the beautiful, beautiful industry. And like you say, pulling people together, it's been great to see how resilient whiskey and whiskey drinkers have been during the current situation, and not letting all the social distancing and barriers that have gone up stopping sharing a dram. And I think probably for a lot of people, what we're going through right now is the first time they've been able to really engage with whiskey in a informative way, in the sense that a lot of people who enjoy whiskey in a rocks glass on a Friday night after a long week's work, who probably don't know that much about it, they know what they enjoy, are now seeing things popping up online, and they're being able to engage with this whiskey in a new way.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the way the world's going. I mean, it's I think as an industry we have a duty to kind of educate people about whiskey anyway. But I think as we're moving online, and that's going to become more of the norm, then producing the level of information and education that's accessible for people who, if all they want to do is have a nice whiskey at the end of the day and read a bit about it, then great. We've got a duty to kind of make sure that those people know about what they're drinking, the best way to enjoy it, and keep them engaged with the category as it evolves and actually faces some stiffening competition going forward as well. So it's been great to see.
Yeah, It has indeed, and I think, I mean, it's always something that I try to bear in the back of my mind when I'm going into a tasting that I'm going to host, is that there's a very, very good chance that this is somebody's first ever tasting, and it's my job to take them through what a Glencairn glass is and things like that, and I can't just jump straight into the deep end of things. And I came across something that I found was pretty interesting today, and it's a pretty crude measure of enthusiasts to bottles sold, but there are more bottles of whiskey sold in a day than there are Glencairn glasses sold in a year. Now that's a pretty crude measure, but it just goes to show that the vast majority of whiskey drinkers probably aren't nosing and tasting in the way that we like to do. But there are more and more people coming to that side of the whiskey industry as the brands do their job to reach out to people and bring people in.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, the likes of the Glencairn and other glasses coming up, if you can bring people on board and take them on that journey and sit there and help them understand how something like that brings the whiskey to life. And this is terribly ironic because I'm sitting drinking it out of the widest tumbler you've ever seen in your life. But I'm a big advocate.
That looks like a bucket of whiskey there. That's the sort of measure that you get in Spain.
Yeah, well, here's something for perspective. It's there you go. It's not too bad. But obviously we use that kind of glassware on our courses because it helps people on the courses get the most out of the whiskies that we educate them with, and we obviously kind of teach them how these glasses help the consumer or indeed the professional get the most out of the whiskey that they're nosing.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about tonight's topic then, whiskey education. You made the point yourself, and Greg's Whiskey Guide, who's in the chat from France, has made the point that he is very much self-taught. He spent a lot of time teaching himself and learning about whiskey, reading lots of books. I've met Greg at a few shows now, know that he spends a lot of time engaging with whiskey. And you mentioned yourself that for a long time, your whiskey knowledge came from your enthusiasm and your self-taught side of things. And you can definitely go very, very far doing that. There's loads of tastings and festivals that you can go to. But why do you think that formal education, if we call it that, in terms of courses and going to a place to actually learn and achieve a certificate of sorts, why do you think that step is an important one?
Yeah, I mean, there are 1,000 different reasons. I mean, when I kind of step back and think about it, I think there are 3 main ones. But I'm going to start off with an analogy that I quite like running through my head. So I've played the guitar for about as long as I've enjoyed whiskey, so 10, 12 years or something. And guitar, I've always been self-taught, right? And I'm happy with that because I don't have any ambition whatsoever to go and stand on a stage and play guitar and sing in front of people. Maybe at a wedding, but not anything kind of beyond that. With whiskey, it got to the point, even as a consumer, where I just thought, well, I want to be able to stand in front of people and talk about this. I want to be able to help them enjoy it. I want to be able to educate them myself. I want to, as a kind of growing fan of the category, be able to stand up and protect it and promote it against other industries. So that's a kind of analogy I use in my head. A lot of people get to the point where they need that confidence, that backing, the credibility to be able to do that. But in terms of, if I had to kind of narrow it down to 3 things, I think for me, firstly, it's a highly complex product. It looks to most people quite accessible, quite attractive as it sits on the bar, or the shelves behind the bar or in someone's corner of the room. But it's incredibly complex. So we need to be able to bring people on that journey. The history of the industry, it goes back around 500 years, talking about how whiskey operates in foreign markets as well as Scotland and the UK. How it's made, the nuances that make whiskey what it is, and again, so different between different distilleries, even expressions from within the same distillery. But there's also separating the fact from the fiction. We know that there's been a lot of myth and tales generated over the years about whiskey and about every aspect of it. But if we're to maintain our place at the top of the industry, then being able to get across the facts and separate the fact from fiction is really important. I think secondly, this is interesting because I'm writing a paper on it at the moment that's going to come out from the Academy, is staying ahead of the competition and dealing with growing issues that the industry is facing globally. So we know that there's a lot of competition within Scotch, but within the wider spirits and drinks market, that's only increasing, especially in terms of quality. We're seeing shifting demographics going for quality over quantity, and that's only going to try and steal some market share from Scotch. So staying ahead of that is critical. Things like, obviously, Brexit was a massive issue. COVID-19 is going to change the way that we do things in the industry, how we export our knowledge and our products. Counterfeiting, we need to be able to spot, even as consumers, the difference between a real whiskey and a fake one, and even the subtleties of that. Fake news, we need to be able to spot where there's fake news popping up, again, from competitors. We've seen quite a lot of that. Competitors intentionally knocking elements of Scotch's prestige on the head just to kind of try and gain a foothold. And there's also the ongoing issue of trade wars as well. So how do we educate markets to get across the importance of Scotch and other whiskies to their local economies as well? I think the third one, and probably the most simple one, is there's just a demand for it. Whether you've been in the industry for decades or whether you've been in it for months, there is undoubtedly a huge pent-up demand to know about whiskey. On the professional side, that's maybe you want to go back into your workplace with enhanced confidence, to market your product, to sell it, to take it abroad, to tell your brand story, to tell the story of the product. And enthusiasts, there's a huge thirst for just being able to get the most out of their whiskey again. Consumers are faced with so many different choices that it's no longer a case of or it's less the case that someone has one favorite, and they tend to hop between different favorites or different categories or explore more. And people just want to know how to be able to explore them in the best possible way and get the most out of them as well. So if I had to kind of cut it down to three, those would be the areas that stick in my mind.
Yeah, that's a lot to digest as well. But one comment. No, that's great. It's great to hear all of that. But one comment that's come in is from Stuart Dick, who works in our visitor centre and has gone through the diploma with the Edinburgh Whisky Academy. And he said that he doesn't play guitar, but your description hits the nail on the head. I personally played bass as a kid and ended up on stage a few times with it. But just before lockdown, weirdly enough, I bought myself a guitar and said, I'm going to learn to play guitar. And then this lockdown happened, and I've had as good a chance as ever, but I still wouldn't be confident going on stage. And I think what you touch on is not necessarily the skills or the information, but the confidence that a structured learning brings to that. And especially when you're talking about things like the myths and the, I guess you could say that the whiskey marketeers of yesteryear have done a lot for the industry, but they've also got a lot to answer for nowadays. I'll be touching on that a little bit more next week, because my guest next week is Becky Paskin from Our Whiskey, and I know she's got a lot to say on that topic. So we'll be talking about that a lot then. But even things like, when I'm always reminded of the time that I got a taxi in America, and he said, the taxi driver asked what I was there for. And I said, I work for a whiskey distillery. I work in Scotch whiskey. And he goes, oh, that Japanese Scotch is really hot right now. So, and the thing is, though, that we're laughing at that, but I dare say there's more people in the world that would say the phrase Japanese Scotch than there are people like us that would laugh at them for doing it, right?
Yeah, and I think for most people, they'll probably laugh it off. I think for those that invest time and energy and money and passion into the industry, it's quite frustrating. I'll give you an example, and I wrote about this in the article today that'll come out, I think, next week. I read an interview on quite a popular lifestyle website with an Irish distiller. And in that article, the Irish distiller made a very big point about the fact that Scotch whiskey was only matured for 2 years and Irish whiskey was matured for 3, which inherently made Irish whiskey better. Now, I don't need to tell anybody on this channel that A, that's incorrect, and B, it was pretty obvious to anyone that knows about Scotch what the guy was doing. So, but I didn't come away from that thinking, oh, well, that's funny, haha. I actually came away and I wrote wrote to the publication. I just said, look, you've got to get your facts right, because that can do lasting damage to the category. So, you know, it's things like that pop up. And I think, again, coming back to education, that's why people who are custodians of the industry, in whatever form, you know, they need to be armed with that information such that when it comes up, you know, they are able to respond to it and, you know, protect and promote the category, which it's a phrase I love using and I love thinking about it and I love response. But every one of the alumni that leave Whisky Academy or forms our alumni network, they ultimately go on to promote Scotch whisky, and to protect it as well. And the bigger a network we can create along with the industry, you know, the better the category is going to fare worldwide.
Yeah. Now, Greg's asked an interesting question, and I'll come back to it, because one point I wanted to make before that was something you were talking about a lot there, was not just having the confidence to communicate about whisky, but also the ability. When we get you to talk about the academy, which will also tie into Greg's question, is any part of that course about talking about whisky? You know, is there a part of the course that takes you away from the learning about whisky and takes you into how do you communicate with people about whisky? I'm thinking more for bartenders in Edinburgh, for example, that have tourists who have never really heard about whisky before and want to learn about it. Is the actual communication covered?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the greatest example I can give you is on our diploma in the art of tasting whiskey. So this is another in-person course that we run for a day in Edinburgh a year. And there's an aspect of that looks at conducting tastings, for example. So it's something that a lot of us in the industry do, and a lot of people who aren't in the industry do as well. And that's that basically takes people through the process for hosting a tasting. So what do you need in terms of materials, the kind of whiskies that are going to make for an interesting range, how the environment you're in can influence the flavor, or what the aromas, the sensations you're experiencing in the glass, and how to communicate as well, but also crucially how not to communicate. So, you know, take the example of a barman. If the barman pours you a whiskey and tells you what it's going to taste like, that's what you're going to taste by and large. One of the key messages we try and get across is you can lead somebody towards how to explore a whiskey with their nose and their palate, but don't be too prescriptive, because there's so much in there. There's so much in this glass that I will taste that you might not. But if I told you what you were looking for, you'd probably find it before you find anything else. So, so that's the kind of way that we help people communicate practically when they're sharing and tasting whiskies. And you're right; it's a really important thing to be able to do, because communication in any field is critical. But in one as complex and wide-ranging as ours, it's fundamental, really.
Yeah, and it's a point that, you know, when I started off doing tastings, you know, this would have been back in 2013. I think I was 22 at the time, and I was doing whiskey tastings. And my job then was, I felt, to communicate the tasting notes that we'd written at the distillery. And it wasn't until one day that I was nosing a whiskey that I found myself disagreeing with the tasting notes that we had written on the back of the bottle, that I realized this is not the right way to do things. And essentially, nosing and tasting, it's asking people to remember. It's not asking people to be right. It's asking them to remember what they smell and things. And an example I love of that was myself and Andy from Arran. One day we were smelling the same whiskey, and I made the point that it smells like the burning heather that we do on the moors in the north of Scotland. And for Andy, it reminded him of the metro in Glasgow. You know, and that's because that's what our experience is. Neither of us were right, neither of us were wrong. It was just that was our experience. Tabitha has made a point that I think is very funny for people that do know quite a lot about whiskey, and that is that a lot of Japanese whiskey is actually Scotch, though, and she is true. But that is definitely a conversation for another day, or one of my master classes if you ever come to them, because it's something I talk about quite a bit when talking about the history of Tomatin Distillery being Japanese owned now. And she also did make the point that It seems like the Irish writer that you were talking about maybe got confused between distillation 3 times and 2 times rather than maturation. But a
Might be
pretty
the case.
thing to get wrong if you're going to be talking about whiskey in that way.
Well, I was going to say he or she maybe needs to come on our Irish whiskey module that we'll be releasing soon, because that'll soon correct that particular error.
Yeah, that's actually something that I would be interested to have a look at myself, because my job, I've always said, is to know more about Tomatin distillery than anybody else that I come across. Now, of course, people like Graham Yunson, our master distiller, are going to know a lot more about that than me. But in terms of, I should be confident to walk into any room and be the fountain of knowledge for Tomatin. I'm not that way about Scotch whiskey, as a whole. I'm just a geek who reads a lot of books and drinks a lot of whiskey, but I don't profess to be the master of all these distilleries. And Irish is something that I've spent very little time with, so that's something of interest to me. Now, I'm going to get on to Greg's question now, because it probably takes us quite nicely into you talking a little bit about Edinburgh Whisky Academy. And I must admit, his question, it's something that I thought about myself quite a lot. When I first heard about Edinburgh Whisky Academy offering people a diploma after 2 days, I must admit I was a little bit skeptical. Having met people who have worked in the whisky industry for 50 years and don't have a diploma, how can one be given in 2 days? I guess the analogy that I got from that was people who train in karate for a couple of years and have a black belt. And Greg's question is along that lines. He's saying, big question for me for your guest is, do you consider it serious to be certified as whisky expert for just 2 days of classes? How long is your own certification, please? And the reason he's asking that, he added in a bit later on, was Greg follows a lot of the YouTubers in the whisky world, and he's seen a lot of people now who have these certifications, but I guess the point he's making is it just something that you pay to get that certificate, or can you really then class yourself as a whisky expert after doing this course? Yeah, so that's quite a loaded question, but and maybe a challenging one, but it would be unfair of me not to ask it.
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. We'd be the first to say that nobody is going to be able to take a course over 2 days and become an expert. It doesn't happen, and it's disrespectful to everybody that, as you say, has worked in the industry for decades and is a genuine expert. I think ours is aimed at both professionals and enthusiasts. So the point is that people come in, they get this rounded education about the industry, so not aligned to any particular brand or any particular part of it, but a rounded education, and it's from experts. It's delivered by experts. So all that content that we deliver online and in person, that's been written by the experts. And then when these people take the courses, our candidates take the courses, they are in the room with the people that have been there for 30, 40, 50 years. So they're getting that first-hand experience. And that largely is what sets the Edinburgh Whisky Academy aside from many of the traditional competitors, that people can be assured of that they're getting that expert interaction. So no, you're not going to become an expert after 2 days. You are going to come out with a recognized diploma, a respected diploma. And as I say, you're going to come out with, as far as we can see, the best foundation for you to either enhance the career you already have, or have a greater appreciation and enjoyment of the whiskey that you enjoy. So that's what it's all about, really. As far as the WSEC, I think for us, really, the differentiation is in the name. Wine and spirits, that's broad, it's wide, it's incredibly well respected and established. We love whiskey. That's why we want to teach specifically about whiskey. We also do gin courses, but it is the Edinburgh Whisky Academy. So everyone who comes to the door can be assured that they're focused on this particular category, and they're going to come out with a pretty unrivaled set of knowledge about it as well. But it's a fantastic question. Thank you for asking it.
And thank you for answering it, because I think that's it's definitely the challenging end of the question spectrum that we've had on these chats. But I guess then in that case, at the start I mentioned that there are a wide range of education available. I would say on the very, very one end of the spectrum, you've got Heriot Watt's undergraduate and postgraduate courses, and you've got the Institute of Brewing and Distilling have their Diploma, which is a 3-year course. That's what I'm currently doing myself. They've also got their GCD, and they're very much focused at people. I would say Heriot Watt's focused at people looking to fast track themselves into the distilling side of the industry. The Institute of Brewing and Distilling is more targeted at people already working in the production side of the industry. And then at the other end, you've got things like distillery tours, master classes, tastings and things like that. And in the middle, you've got things like probably Springbank School is a good example. You know, you get to go and work at Springbank for 5 days. And it's probably the ultimate distillery tour. You know, people can make a home brew kit at home, but because of the law, we're not allowed to distill at home. Sadly, but that's probably the closest people can get. So on that spectrum of things, where do you see what Edinburgh Whisky Academy offers? And I guess we should say, when I'm saying this, the diploma specifically, because there are other courses that we'll talk about, but where does the diploma fit into that spectrum of things?
Yeah, well, I think you started answering the question by saying there's a lot of established courses out there that are for the technical side of the industry. So the craftspeople, the distillers, the producers. You know, if you want to walk into a job as a master distiller or a distiller, you know, you're not going to come through a 2-day diploma and be able to operate a distillery and create great whiskey. So our value proposition really is more targeted at the professionals in the industry that are maybe market facing. So the marketeers, the brand ambassadors, the brand home guides, the salespeople, business leaders who might not necessarily actually know that much about the nuances of whiskey. So it's kind of that side of the professional, that side of the profession really that we target at. And as we've said before, the other main category that we cater for is the enthusiasts. But in terms of where it sits along that spectrum, would it be too obvious for me to say it sits somewhere nicely in the middle?
I mean, if it sits there, it sits there. That's the best place for it then. And you mentioned an interesting point there, and I think it's something, you know, when we talk about these courses, it is obvious to think of the sort of high-end whiskey bars sending people to go and be trained in this, tour guides to be trained to a level. But a point that you made there that I find quite interesting is people working for distilling companies that maybe aren't necessarily at the coalface. You know, I mentioned before I came on here, I worked at White & Mackay for a year, covering sales sort of in Eastern Europe and things like that. My background at Tomatin before becoming the brand ambassador is a commercial one. I was a whiskey fan, and the size of the company meant that as the sales manager, you kind of had to be the brand ambassador for your markets as well. So that was kind of built in. But what I found very interesting when I was working at White & Mackay was that everybody there is offered the opportunity to do their WSET2 in spirits. I think that's a fantastic thing, and it's probably a similar opportunity that you would offer to companies as well, in that you've got people working in logistics who have maybe shipped cartons of juice or toothpaste around the world before this, and then they come into whiskey. It's good for them to have that knowledge and to be able to talk about what they do, I think.
It's if I owned a whiskey, I would think it was essential. I mean, we work with a lot of the big distillers and owners in Scotland. You know, White & Mackay is one of our main clients. We work a lot with the Macallan. We're working with the Scotch Malt Whisky Society as well. Now, they're obviously whiskey is their raison d'etre, but there are a lot of people who have come into those industries or those companies from other areas, and it's really important, even just from feeling some sort of affinity to the brand, that you actually know what it is that you're contributing to, and what you are then contributing to the market as a business. And I think so. I've seen a question come in there from Kenny Ferguson, who's my uncle, and I promise this isn't a plant, but hey, Kenny, and this is a really relevant question in that context. So Kenny's question is the romance and mythology around whiskey as important as the science and the facts?
So just about to pull that question out. Great question.
Yeah, it is a fantastic question. Kenny, your bottle's on the way. Is it? Well, let's look at that in the context of brand education. So one of the sort of value propositions from the Academy is that we're brand neutral. So we don't have any affiliation to any Scotch whisky or any other brand. The reason being is obviously your colleagues, people associated with the brand will be educated in your brand's history. You'll be educated in the way your whiskey is made. You'll be educated in the different expressions that you produce. Now, as you've touched on earlier, with that comes some degree of marketing, of storytelling. And that is important to be able to differentiate from the facts and the figures. So if consumers, for example, are reading about brands through the eyes of a brand, they're going to pick up on those stories, which are fantastic. They're an essential part of the industry. But it's key that the people who are selling know where the story starts and where it stops, and where the fact and the fact and the science begins, and be able to kind of pivot between the two and almost intertwine the message in a quite an attractive way for the consumer. So to come back to Kenny's question, I think the romance and mythology are an essential part of the whiskey industry. I think it's an ingredient that has contributed to its success. It will contribute to its success forevermore. But increasingly, as the consumer is becoming more aware, the science and the fact is, for me, sits alongside, at least alongside the mythology and the storytelling.
Yeah, and I think the romance and mythology is a great way of wording it, because it touches on what you said earlier on. There is a lot of mythology that we need to bust. There is romanticism and mythology, and I think that's hugely important in sparking that interest for the consumer as to why they would pick up that glass of whiskey. I defy anybody who comes to Scotland as a tourist not to want to pick up a glass of whiskey to do the whole shortbread tin view of Scotland, But I think what is more important for me than the romanticism and the mythology is the legitimate history and the real stories, and maybe breaking down some of those myths and bringing them into a real way. But when you get to the science thing, I always reminded of when I was in the Novar Arms, which is about 5 miles along the road. It is not what you would call a cocktail bar or anything like this at all. It's the local pub in a small village. Great pub. And the local worthies are your big juicy Tennent's drinkers. I'll have a pint of Tennent's, please. And I remember being in there one night, and one of the guys ordered a glass of gin, and he'd ordered Harris gin, and I remember him passing it to his friend and saying, "Try that." The first thing was, it just blew my mind that these guys were now drinking gin, because you would never have seen that 10 years ago, So it's great that barrier's been broken down. But what really surprised me was when he said, "Do you like that?" And the guy said, "Yes." And he goes, "That's because they use seaweed in it." How do you know that? How do you know about the botanical breakdown of that gin? And how do you know that that's important to flavour? These are not guys that are trained in spirits in any way whatsoever. It just goes to show, though, that consumers on the whole are far more interested in what's in their glass and how it got there than they ever were before.
Yeah. Did you say it was Harris gin they were drinking?
It was, yeah.
So they've done an amazing job at bringing that to the forefront as part of their branding. They've been phenomenally successful in that. And but you're absolutely right. I think and that's another reason for if you're standing on stage with your guitar in the whiskey world, you don't want to be caught short and find yourself in a position where you're trying to sell tomatin in a foreign market, and the person you're selling to, comes up with something that you actually didn't know about, and you're kind of the one asking them questions. And we just need to be armed with that kind of level of knowledge and scientific fact that actually complements the lovely stories that we're also able to tell about the industry and the whiskey.
Yeah, and I think what I've learned is that there is always someone out there who is very happy to lay a banana skin for you to trip up on. And rightfully so. I do like a little game of challenge the ambassador and see what you can get out of me.
Yeah, there's a funny story actually. So again, involving my uncle Kenny, we were sitting at a bar in a hotel in Nairn, and this was maybe 6 or 7 years ago, and I was a bit greener behind the ears, and I turned to him and said, "Oh, there's a bottle of Dalmore. Do do you know the reason they've got the stag on the front is somebody saved King Alexander from being speared by a stag back in the day. And he turned around to me and said, "Do you really believe that?" And I thought, oh, maybe not. It was then I kind of started to realize there was maybe not quite as much to it as it met the eye, but or more than there was met the eye. But it's those kind of examples. You know, I don't want to be in a position where my uncle can turn around to me and school me on whiskey ever again. So, you know, the doing the diploma in itself was worth it for that.
Yeah, and it is nice as well. That's it is nice to have that mythology and things, but it's also good to be able to cut through it when it comes down to it, you know. But I think you're going to have to give your Uncle Kenny a fiver for asking that question now. That was a good, he threw the ball in there for you to knock it down there. But I'm just seeing Greg's made a comment there as well. Greg, sorry if I confused you. I'm not doing the WSET myself. I was offered it at White and Mackay, but I was going to be leaving before I had the chance to do it. I'm currently doing the IBD Diploma, which is a different thing altogether. But again, I think the point you're making is it's good to see people in this position who already have these jobs still continuing to try and learn and improve their knowledge in various ways as well.
Yeah, as I've said, a lot of our candidates come through the academy have been in the industry for years, and they either want to learn more or realize that, you know, the industry's moved on to such a point that they need to learn more to stay relevant and in the game.
Yeah. And we were talking a little bit there about knowing what's in your glass. I've just poured myself a dram of the 2009 Tomatin Caribbean rum finish. Now, I don't honestly. Those of you that are watching this is our 9th episode of the Softer Side Sessions. I don't only drink Tomatin. It's just that's what's on the shelf behind me, and I always forget to grab a bottle of something else before I come through. So, yeah, Tomatin again tonight. So a few comments coming in about the course. So Kevin is saying that he did the WSET after doing the Edinburgh Whisky Academy and found it to be a huge example. And Stuart again has come in and said the course has helped him have a lot of those answers when it comes to the technical stuff on tours. Most of the time, the knowledge he gained on the course allows him to take things up a geeky notch. And it's all about knowing when that is the right thing to do and it's the right audience that you've got in front of you. But I spoke to Stuart a little bit before coming on here because obviously I've not got any personal experience with Edinburgh Whisky Academy. And I was keen to find out the kind of inside scoop from someone who has and why they opted for that. And Stuart made the good point that he was looking for something. He didn't feel that he was quite ready to do the GCD, which is very, very technical driven, but that he actually enjoyed how challenging the diploma that you do, that you offer actually is. You know, there was a good bit of reading behind it. It wasn't just, he even admitted that he maybe walked into it a bit cocky, having worked in the visitor centre for a while, but was actually quite humbled by some of the difficult things on the course. So that's good to hear.
Yeah, I think you know, myself included, when I initially did the first course, I think a lot of people get to the assessment at the end of the 2-day diploma, which is the SQSS assessment. So this is what you need to pass to get your formal qualification, your certificate. And I think a lot of people are quite taken aback at how challenging it is. I mean, in a good way, but you know, it's not a case of turn up, absorb some stuff that a guy says or a lady says on the day and pass the exam. You have to invest time in absorbing it meaningfully, and it does help to have knowledge beforehand as well, in some degree, which is something we're working on with our customer journey on, and maybe come on to that in a bit. But that, you know, for us, that's really gratifying because we don't want people to leave at the end of 2 days or the 1-day diploma in tasting and say, well, that was easy and I don't feel challenged. So we love it when people turn around and go, you know, that was tough. And it was worth investing that energy to learn, to be able to come through that assessment.
So talk us through what goes on the diploma. We're going to talk about some of the online courses in a minute because they're very important right now. But the diploma, like you mentioned off screen, is kind of what Edinburgh Whisky Academy has built its name on. So, I mean, as I saw online, it seems to be in a stunning location first and foremost. But talk us through what actually is talked about, what is on that diploma.
Yeah, well, let me kind of try and paint a picture for you. So as you've said, it is in a stunning location. It's in It's in a grand old historic house, Arniston, on the outskirts of Edinburgh. So all the candidates join us there for the 2-day diploma in single malt whiskey. First and foremost, the energy in the room when you get 15 or so people coming together who are eager to learn about something they love. I mean, that's before even a word has been spoken by the lecturer. That's such a buzz. In terms of how it works, so as I say, it's very all-encompassing, the diploma. So we have a classroom. We have a dedicated classroom in the space where all the students go with one of our expert lecturers. The first day is looking principally at the raw materials and production. So what goes into a whiskey, what we need to create whiskey, and the nuances of how it's produced. And that really goes into a lot of detail from that end-to-end process. I should say that before the diploma starts, all the candidates are sent some quite in-depth reading on the history of the industry and the business of the industry. So they're expected to read that and absorb that before they show up, because that forms part of the final assessment. But we have that first day. Looking at production, raw materials, etc. And I can't remember where it's the first day or the second day. It's been a while since I was there. But one of the greatest parts of the course, being so near to Glenkinchie, we incorporate that into the diploma. So at the end of one of the days, all the candidates head to Glenkinchie with the lecturer, and the lecturer brings that to life on the day. So we literally take a tour of the distillery, a private tour, and bring everything that we've learned to life in a distillery, which just helps everything sink into place. The second day, everybody comes back, and what we're looking at there is we're sort of moving on to maturation, bottling side of things. We look at how single malt whiskey differs from blends and grains, to give a bit of a comparison. And then at the end of that second day, that's when we have the assessment. So there's an exam atmosphere. Everybody's socially distanced under exam conditions, but I guess going forward in the medium term, we're going to have to do that anyway.
Yep.
Then we have the assessment for a couple of hours, and after that, it's really up to everyone whether they want to go and have enjoy a whiskey back in Edinburgh and chat over the course and get to know each other a bit better, which many of the candidates do, and it's a fantastic thing to see them go off and do so. There's breakouts for coffee and tea or for lunch, and these little parts of the course are just as important as the formal bits, because that's when people get together and chat about what they've learned, riff off one another about their experiences in whiskey generally. So it's just a 2 days full of energy, and everyone's there for the same reason, and it's so good to be part of that.
Yeah, it definitely reminds me there of what you were saying about, kind of when you leave your exams in school and you're chatting to each other about the questions that came up and what your answer was. You almost learn more from that than you did in the course itself, because you're taking other people's perspective into how they answered it and things. Akos, I hope I'm pronouncing your name rightly in one of those pronunciations, has asked, good evening, how long is the finishing of the Tomatin 14-year-old? Which type of port casks are used? So unless you want to answer that, I think I'll handle that one, John.
Sorry, can you say that again?
He's asking the Tomatin 14-year-old, which type of port casks are used and for how long? I think I'll handle that one, right?
Yeah, handle that. I don't want to do your brand anymore.
So what we're using there, we're maturing for 12 years in refill hogsheads. That just allows our tomatin spirit to oxidize a little bit, sweeten up, bring in a lot of the fruitier flavors, and then we're filling it into tawny port pipes for a minimum of 2 years. And they're port pipes that have held tawny port for over 50 years before they get to us. So pretty lovely whiskey, lovely stuff. So I hope you're enjoying that if you've got a glass of it in front of you. So Greg's asked a great question. Do you know what the percentage rate of success is on the course in terms of people that do the course and people who pass the course?
Yeah, fantastic question. I don't know the exact figures. I think in my head, I think it's around 70% come through first time. But those who don't come through first time, they have an opportunity to come back and have sessions with the tutor, so that they can go into the areas that they perhaps weren't so successful in, make sure they shore them, and then come back into the particular modules in which they weren't successful. So, so everybody comes through it. It's just a case of making sure that you're strong across the board and everybody gets ample opportunity to do that. In terms of the actual percentage, I'd need to check back with Kirsty and the team, but it's around that figure, I think.
Yeah, that's a good figure as well, though, because it's nice to know that it's a high number, because that suggests that the quality of the education is very good. But it's good to know that it's not 100%, because that would come across as like, I'm buying a diploma sort of thing, you know. So it's great to see that it's high but not ridiculous. So
yeah, reassuringly difficult, right?
yes, yeah, absolutely. You wouldn't want, and that touches on the point that Greg made earlier on. You know, a lot of people who on YouTube are mentioning that they have this background, but he's a little bit skeptical as to how much information and knowledge they actually have. I think if it's difficult to pass this test, then that's quite good, especially if you're going to go on and use that certificate or that diploma to promote yourself and say, listen to me in many ways, you know.
Yeah, for sure.
So the current situation is obviously putting a bit of a dampener on the diploma side of things and people getting to travel to Edinburgh and do the course. You, ahead of this, already offered some online courses, but what are the online courses? How much is that becoming important to the business now?
It's critical for us and everybody else, whether it's education provision or any other industry. Online is where we've got to focus much of our efforts going forward. So, as you say, you know, fortunately, before this situation, we had invested a lot of time and energy in creating an online presence. So last year we launched the flagship online course, which is called the Introduction to Whisky Certificate. And that is approximately an 8-hour course, and the modules in there, they effectively reflect what you get, what you learn on the diploma, just not quite as much detail. So candidates can log on, they can complete that in their own time, and they still come away with, you know, a significant amount of knowledge and insight into the industry and all those fantastic aspects of it. In addition to that, we've created 2 standalone modules. So one's called Focus on Flavor, and the other is called Wake Up Your Whiskey Nose. And essentially what they are, they're standalone reflections of the art of tasting whiskey diploma. So that's kind of aimed at the kind of people who they may be enthusiasts and they want to sit back at home, you know, grab a whiskey, spend a couple of hours doing these modules, and they'll help them understand how flavor originates in whiskey, how you can identify what those flavors are, how the olfactory system works in terms of how your brain actually translates what's in your glass into smell and memory, and ultimately how to kind of get the most out of the whiskey in your glass. So those are what we have online at the moment, in addition to a module called Gin School, which is the equivalent in gin. But the exciting thing for us going forward in terms of the online courses, we're working on new modules all the time. As I said, we have one coming up on Irish whiskey. We have one coming up on maturation, something that, you know, could be a diploma in itself. People spend decades exploring that. But the really exciting one that I can share with you a little bit here is we're looking to take the diploma in single malt whiskey online as well. So we're doing a lot of planning, a lot of thinking about that at the moment. And the reason we're doing it is because we know there's the demand. Not everybody can come to Scotland, but so many more people want to have this level of whiskey education and certification at the end of it. So then the big challenge for us at the moment is translating that sort of premium experience online, and trying to replicate as much as we can what they get on the course in Edinburgh. And the way we're doing that is by we're investing in a really premium learning management system. We are enabling access for all these online candidates to our experts, so webinars, so they can get that back and forth while they're learning. We're creating an online community of alumni, which again is crucial for ongoing learning and community. And we're also looking at how we get whiskey samples out to these people wherever they are as well, such that they can learn practically alongside their online learning. So that's something that's coming down the pipeline. And I think, you know, we're really excited about how that's going to help people further afield, you know, move along their whiskey education journey.
Now, on that, and before you take us through the demo that you're going to do, knowing my knowledge of the Scottish Qualifications Authority, If you're doing the diploma online, how do you go about doing the exam? Because quite often they want you in a centralized location where they can have someone watching over you and making sure that nobody's talking or Googling or things like this. So is that a difficulty? Does that still have to be done in a location?
Yeah, it's a consideration for sure. The way we operate at the moment is if you're doing the Introduction to Whiskey certificate online and you want the SQA qualification on top of that, there are regional centres that you can attend, and they kind of recreate the conditions and the stringency that the SQA are rightly insistent on. So that's something we're looking at in connection with the diploma as well.
And is this, when you say regionally, is this only in Scotland, or is it available to do further afield?
Yeah, I think there's regions all over the world, centres all over the world where you can conduct your assessment in these environments. So it's a big enabler for us having that network as well, and it's something we're tapping into and integrating with how that whole online experience is going to work.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I'm already seeing quite a lot of comments coming in of people who are very interested in the online courses and asking how do they sign up for them and things like that. I think, as I was saying earlier on, I've been using this time to learn a little bit of guitar. Everyone's got a little bit more time on their hands to try and sharpen their skills or learn a little bit more about what they love. So why don't you take us through what you were going to talk through? You were going to go online and show us some of what you can offer.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me share my screen, and while I'm doing it, I'll just give you a bit of insight into how to get there. So all of our online courses are accessible through our website, so www.edinburghwhiskyacademy.com. They're all there. You can sign up online, and then you will be registered onto our learning management system, which is where they all sit. So can you see my screen there?
I can. There we go. That should be it.
So I'll give you a wee overview, and then I'll give you an overview of pricing and some offers we've got on at the moment. But as I say, when candidates sign up, they are taken to our learning management system, which is this lovely screen in front of you. And on here, all of the courses that you've signed up to will appear on this portal, so that you can go in and complete them at your leisure, whenever the fancy takes you. So I'm just going to give you a small overview of how the flagship online course works. So the Introduction to Whiskey certificate. So if I go into that one, what you'll see here is the course structure on the left-hand side. As I say, this very much mirrors what the Diploma in Single Malt Whisky is all about. So starting off with the history, the business, raw materials, production, batch distillation, maturation, bottling, grain distillation and blending, and then the assessment at the end. And each one of these modules takes around about an hour to complete, on average about an hour. Now, in terms of what they look like, let me give you an example. So if you click onto historical development, what everybody finds in the first screen is this image of a distillery. What's really cool is we've mapped each of these modules to the kind of corresponding area in the distillery where all this magic takes place. So in terms of the history, we've got the distillery museum. For the business of whiskey, we've got the classroom. For the mill room of raw materials, we've got the mill room, etc., all the way through up to the nosing room where grain distillation and blending is taught. So as people are learning, they're kind of following this journey through the distillery, which is brilliant and really helps bring it to life. In terms of what the actual courses look like, so throughout they are interactive, which is obviously an important tool for learning. This is quite a cool little one from the business of whiskey, this module. So we know that labeling of whiskey bottles is particularly important, so getting the labeling right. So this, for example, gives you an opportunity to create your own little whiskey label, and you can select all the different nuances you want your whiskey to look like. So in the spirit of you guys, we're Highlands, and just get kind of little fun interaction to things like this. So in addition to the interactive pieces, we've also got in-depth diagrams about all the processes. So this is the malting barley to wash process, and how we kind of follow that through in production. We have a series of videos. So this is Vic, who does the Diploma in Single Malt Whisky. So again, these are videos filmed in the distilleries that bring it all to life. This is a good one from the maturation module about the effect that casks will have over time on whiskey, depending on how many times they've been used. the bottling process, so what actually happens when the whiskey comes out of the cask in terms of how it gets filtered, maybe coloured with water added, chill filtered, etc.
I'll stop you right there because
Yeah.
Luna Aaron just popped into the chat saying, "Hello, geeks. Hope you're all well." And there definitely are a few of us whiskey geeks in the chat tonight. So let's not talk about colouring, chill filtration, or things like that. Let's keep this whiskey that you're making au naturel for those guys.
Yeah, we're definitely geeking out now. Well, you'll be glad to know that I'm coming to the really geeky bit, which is the assessment at the end. So, so coming back to what we said earlier about, it's not a walk in the park. These assessments. At the end of the introduction to whiskey certificate, you've got 53 questions related to what you've learned. So, there's a lot to go through there, a lot to remember. But I think, by the end of it, you'll have definitely earned a strong dram if you've got a good score there. So, so that's a kind of whistle-stop tour of the Introduction to Whiskey certificate, and the modules are similar. The diploma, when we bring that online, I think that's going to take us into a new world of kind of really premium experience. So it's good fun, and I'd recommend everyone does it. In terms of how you can access them, as I say, they're available on our website. At the moment, we've got an offer whereby everybody can receive 30% off the range of our courses. So it's a great opportunity to go in and do some learning while we're all otherwise a little bit more idle than we might be. And for anybody out there that is stuck for a Father's Day gift, we've also got an offer on at the moment whereby you can buy your dad access to the Introduction to Whiskey certificate and the Focus on Flavour for £89, I think it is. So hopefully if there's a few of you out there stuck for what to buy your dad, then that's a good solution.
I might have to do that. I had a conversation with my dad a wee while ago, and he bought all of the Game of Thrones series as a collector piece that he would sell for some money in future years. And I don't think he quite gets it yet, but that they're still selling them. But yeah, no, so moving on from that swiftly. You mentioned there that there's a 30% offer right now. I know that there's a range of prices from the introductory things right through to the diploma, but what does the range of pricing look like? How does that look? I know everyone can go and Google it themselves, but it's always nice to hear it from yourself. Yeah,
so I'm going to give the standard prices just because I don't want to risk my math here. But if everyone has a calculator, you can take 30% off what I'm about to say for the time being. So in terms of the online, the Introduction to Whiskey certificate is £120. The standalone modules are £25 each. In terms of the whiskey diplomas, the diploma in single malt whiskey is £850, and that's across 2 days. And the Art of Tasting Whiskey is £495, and that's for 1 day. So fairly accessible. You receive your certificate at the end, so you get that kind of credible outcome as well as a fantastic experience. Whether you're doing it at home or you're in Edinburgh, which we hope many will be soon.
Yeah, I mean, so they're by no means the cheapest way to learn about whiskey, but at the same time, from what I'm seeing from you tonight and from what you've talked about, neither is the content. The content it seems to be very well curated and things like that. So even when you look at the Introductory to Whiskey module, if you refer to that as going on 4 distillery tours, you probably get more of the structured learning from this course than you would from going on those tours. Definitely on the diploma side of things, it's at the higher end. But I think if you're saying as well that these are, it tends to be a lot of people who are using it as helping their career and things, then education definitely is a key there.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to pick up on a few of the comments here. It's a really important point. I mentioned we're running a Father's Day offer at the moment, but Tabitha's rightly pointed out that you could buy that offer as long as it runs for your mum's birthday or your wife's birthday, your daughter's birthday, whatever you want. She's made an excellent point that whiskey is not a man's drink, and it's not, and that's no better demonstrated by the fact that the Academy was founded by a pioneering woman right at the front of the whiskey industry, Kirsty. So very good point. Thank you very much for bringing it up.
Yeah, and like I said earlier on, that is something that we'll be talking about a lot next week when Becky's on. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Father's Day is just something that is coming up, and this will be a great gift for them. But this is definitely something for all occasions, and I know plenty of people that would be interested in doing that. So Luna and Tabitha, I'm seeing you guys in the chat there. It would be great to to hear if that's something of interesting to you. I'm seeing from everybody in here that there seems to be a huge amount of interest in doing these courses. So that's great to hear. So absolutely make the most of these offers while they last, and do the courses, guys. I'm actually now looking forward to. Like I said at the beginning, I was skeptical when I first heard of Edinburgh Whisky Academy a couple of years ago, for the reason that I was skeptical about what quality can you get in 2 days and then call it a diploma. I think you've answered that very, very well, that you're not expecting everyone to leave as a whisky expert, but you're expecting them to leave knowing a lot more and being much more confident about their whisky experience. So I think what I will do is, Luna's saying that Father's Day was yesterday in Germany. I think it's mid-June here in the UK, I believe.
21st of June. I think that the international calendar is something that we need to tap into for next year, I think.
Yeah, definitely. But 21st of June, yeah, that rings a bell. It's also my wedding day, so I will. Yeah, well, yeah. So,
well, if you get really bored or it goes flat, then come and do our offer. You're welcome.
Yeah. But like I said, I was skeptical, but I'm actually really keen to do the Irish whiskey module now, just because it's something that I don't have a lot of information about, and it would be good for me to be able to go back in and go through the learning experience to really get the full feeling on this. So, well, John, like I said, most of these chats have been lasting about an hour, and we've just gone over the hour mark. So, I don't know if you've got anything more that you want to talk about the academy, or if there's any of the comments that you're picking up on that I've missed, but I'll leave that with you.
Yeah, I think the comments have been fantastic. It's great to have people interacting with us. Some fantastic questions. As far as the academy is concerned, we just can't wait to keep welcoming people through our doors, whether that's online or in person. Hopefully in person sooner rather than later. It's a fantastic company, and we're very proud of what we do. There's just one more thing related to Tomatin that I'd like to mention. And I said to you, I think earlier on or off air, that I visited the distillery around 10 years ago with my dad and my brother. Yep. And when I took a few photos, like the one on your back right now, so of the casks in the dunnage, and thought no more about them until recently, when I've kind of struck up a bit of a collaboration just at a time with an artist in Argentina called Gisela. And she's been painting some beautiful paintings of whiskey distilleries. And last week I sent her a copy of this photograph from Tomatin and asked if she would paint it. And within a couple of days she'd come back with the finished article. So I'm just going to flash it up on my screen, see if you can see it. But I just wanted to give her a short mention because I've hugely enjoyed this collaboration with her. Here's the painting. You might recognize that. You see it?
Oh wow, incredible! Yeah, I can see it. I think there's a little bit pixelated, but I did see it on Instagram earlier on. That is actually the photo that we've got behind our faces tonight as well. You can see the turquoisey blue color. And I always laugh about that one, because when we're asked on tour, what do the different colors mean? They certainly used to mean how many fills the cask had. Now we move on to a barcode system, but I don't know where they got that tub of turquoise paint back in 1990, but it is strikingly beautiful. It looks like, if you were to see that, you would think it was a cask of Bruichladdich, but I can guarantee that it is not.
It's absolutely stunning, and she does a wonderful job in translating kind of the essences of distilleries onto canvas. And I think that the back and forth that she and I have had is just sort of encapsulates everything that whiskey is for me. It's something that people bond over and get creative over and share. So I just wanted to give her a shout out and say thank you very much, and I'm really enjoying what she's producing. So go and have a look online. She's on Instagram. I'm on Instagram. You can see what she's painted and what she comes out with in the future as well.
Fantastic. Well, John, thank you very much for coming on tonight and for answering the questions, answering some not so easy questions as well, but also for having your uncle on to set up one for you to knock out of the park. So you take the good with the bad there. But everybody, thank you very, very much for coming along tonight. as you know, normally we do the Tomatin Tuesdays on Instagram Live. We're not going to be doing that next week because I have a week of annual leave, so I'm going to be off next week. So we'll not be doing the Tuesday night session. I'm going to be doing my best impression of a gardener for most of the week. But I will be back on Friday night for our softer side session, where, as I say, I'll be joined by Becky Paskin to be talking about some of the industry's issues at the moment. So, ladies and gents, thanks very much for tuning in tonight. John, thank you very much for coming in and sharing the dram with us, and Slán Java.
Slán Java. Thanks, Scott. An absolute pleasure.